Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm just doing a little bit of fiddling underneath the board now that I have this fully articulating baseboard unit which I built in the last video. It's working really well. There's a few little tweaks I want to do with some electrics. Later on I'm going to have to add some more lights, both for the engine shed, which I will be looking at later today, and of course I want to put some street lights in as well, just to give everything a little bit of realism. When the baseboard is up, it gives me full access to everything, so I can do maintenance on all of the layout, access all the point motors, all the blocks, and even the CDU. The whole structure is fairly rudimentary, but it works quite well. Each of these wooden braces, which are on the side, are bolted in the top, which allows them to articulate. And on the bottom, there's a small bolt which pokes through the side panels, and I simply slot that over the holes. So let me just put this down and you can see how it all works. I just push these off here and you can see the pins poking through. Do the same on the other side. I just lift it up a bit to get these to push into position. And because these are tight enough, they stay where they need to be, and then I can just carefully lower the whole thing down. Brilliant. I've even added a shelf underneath which allows me to keep all of my boxes of modelling accoutrements nearby and very easily accessible as and when I need them. Some point in the future I'll get some black fabric and just run it around the outer three sides so that all the gubbins underneath are hidden. As it stands, this can be moved quite easily around the room. I've got felt pads on the bottom of the feet so it slides quite nicely. But if we ever do need to use this room, or if I decide to take this to somewhere else, I can easily fold up the top, take the shelf out and all the stuff on top because it just folds, and then I can take the whole base, articulate it to collapse it, and then the whole thing can be moved through the doors and even into the back of the car really easily. The two hinges on the front, I can also remove the pins, so if I do need to take the layout off, I can lift the entire thing off and it won't affect anything else. I'm really pleased with how this has turned out, but that's enough about the stand. Let's move on to the actual layout, because today I want to tackle this new hardstanding. So for those viewers who are new to the channel, a couple of videos ago I created this Metcalfe engine shed, single red brick engine shed which matches the rest of the models that I've already built for this layout. This is going to go over into this corner and it's going to be located approximately there. The first thing I need to do is cut out this triangle here. Now I left this unstyled because I knew originally that I wasn't going to be coming all the way across with this card technique, and I had in mind that I would always be using some sort of modelling clay. I have a pack of white DAS modelling clay which I'm going to be using for this purpose. So once I've removed this area here, the next step would be to take the model and get it into the position I need it to be in terms of clearance on the edge of the layout. I will then need to mark and remove an excess piece of track here because I don't want this obviously going underneath this area here at the back, which is the workshop area. I then intend to add the clay all the way along this area here. So it will fill in and it's going to come out to this section here. This is going to be my fueling siding area. There's going to be diesel and coal, so it's going to be mixed fuel for steam and diesel locos. I envisage this kind of layout being a transitional layout in terms of it being in the kind of late 50s, early 60s, the end of steam, the introduction of early diesels. Now, it's not prototypical. It's all in my head. It's very much a made up fictional area. And really, as I've said before, it's just a way of me practicing all these different skills for the first ever layout that I've ever built. I do have a plan for a new layout and I will be talking about that in a coming video. But for now, let me keep focus. Let me get my tools out and start with this. Now this is proving to be a bit tougher to remove than I was hoping. PVA really is on there, even with this scraper, which is very sharp because I've had it for 25 years. It was lent to me by a painter and decorator I was working with back in 2001 called Nicola. I probably should give it back to her at some point. Now that's most of that piece off, which is great. It's come out really nicely. I've got a nice tight square line across there, so that's fine. There's a few bits here of old cardboard which I'm just going to wet up and remove as best as I can, but I'm not too fussed if I can't get all of this off. I think the clay will still stick. Right, my next job is to measure and then cut the edge of the track here. I want there to be enough space around the edge of the engine shed here so that it's not butting right up to the edge of the board, just in case I want to put a kind of scenic break, a fence perhaps, maybe some bushes. I haven't yet decided, but I think it makes sense not to have it all the way over here. So I'm just going to come in a couple of centimetres, an inch or so, and just mark that approximately there. It's not actually far off my original box marking. So I'm just going to lift this over. I know you guys can't see it from your side, but I can just see where the inside is, and I'm going to put a mark on the board either side, and there we go. So this is where I need to cut, basically this section here. Okay, that's unpinned, so I'm just going to cut back the chairs and just pop this bit of sleeper off the bottom. And I'll keep those because you never know, they might come in useful for a bit of scenery. And the same for these as well. I'll keep these, you never know when they might come in useful. Okay, that's pinned back in and that's not moving anywhere. Of course, all of the clay will hold this in place anyway. I've removed the cork as well now, so let me just offer up the shed and get it roughly in place. I think approximately there is about right. So I just need to kind of guide around the edge, more so for this area here, just so I can see exactly where things are going to go. Trusty Welshpool and Landfair light railway pencil. In fact, we can see that line is there. I'm just going to mark approximately where it is down the back. Okay, so that's the area of the engine shed. Fantastic. What I want to do is obviously concrete this entire area, but how far, I don't quite know. I'm going to get the models out, which I'm intending to put here, just so I can gauge everything, and then I'll be able to mark around it. And then it's a case of getting the clay out and getting ready to get mucky. So I have this diesel refueling area. We also have a water up pipe stand. I'm not entirely sure of the proper term for this. And then obviously I have a coal bunker, and I'm feeling like that's the kind of layout that I'm going to try and incorporate. Now it's a lot, but the way I see it is small tank engines are going to be backing up, so the coal can be chucked in the back of the coal bunker. Obviously the water can turn around and fill up the tank engine, which is obviously going to be at the front, so that makes sense in my mind's eye. And then the kind of mixed refueling idea with the diesel engines coming in more towards the front, and then we'll have diesel kind of refueling in this area. Now, you may be thinking this is all getting quite close to this control box, and it is, because there is a hill which I'm going to be eventually building up in this area, but this does need to shift across that way. I've just got to do a little bit of electrics underneath the board just to give myself a bit more slack in order to do that, because really it should be much further along that way. So this is what I'm thinking, which ultimately means if I just draft a pencil line around, realistically I'm going to be coming right to the edge of the board and then coming across the front here. So this will actually end up being all clay, this entire area, right up to almost where the points are, which is fine. I think that's what I envisaged, which is why I've kind of cut this here, and I was just going to come across and tidy things up, covering up these dropper wires with the clay. I've peeled back this. It's not perfect, but I can weather it in. But I think now, feeling my finger across there, that should stop any derailments that I've been experiencing. Okay, I think I'm ready to get going. I've protected as much of the existing hard standing area with T-tails. I'm sure that I can be careful enough, but just in case, because it is card, I don't want to get any slops all over it and then have issues with it later on. So in terms of what I need, I've obviously got my Das clay. That's the primary ingredient we're going to be using here. I've got a tub for a little bit of water to make sure everything stays nice and wet. I've got then some shaping tools. I've actually got like a plasterer's trowel here, and I've obviously got my scraping tool, which is just as good at getting along those tracks. Welcome to the dulcet tones of Model Rail Radio. In all seriousness, I thought it'd be much easier to actually crack on with the modelling at hand and come back and overdub later, so here I am. Let me talk you through the process. So the first thing you need to do with Das clay is soften the whole thing up. Just grab it in your hands, manipulate it a bit, crush it around, and once it's nice and soft, it's much easier to work with. If you just cut off a slab and expect just to manipulate it into the board, you're going to struggle. So once I've got that all nice and softened, I start to slap it on. I learnt as I went along that it's actually easier to work in small pieces, and by small pieces I almost mean golf ball sized, ping pong ball sized. Small little lumps, push it into the board and just flatten things out as you go. As you can see, early stages I'm putting down much larger pieces and it's just quite difficult to move it around the board. It's not like filler in the sense that it's wet and it moves around like a liquid. It's very much a solid material, so if you put too much in one area, you physically kind of need to cut it off and move it somewhere else. You can't just drag your blade across and move it across. You'll see a minute ago when I used the big trowel, it just wasn't really making a difference. So it's just a case of really continuing to work. Keep pushing the clay into the board, making sure you're getting it into every single nook and cranny. Keep your hands wet, make sure the clay stays wet. That stops it drying out and cracking too quickly and just gives you more time to manipulate the clay on the board. You can see now how I'm using my fingers to manipulate the clay between the tracks and along the rails. I then use the scraper to try and move a whole load, but it just drags and it's really quite difficult to use. So keep things small, move the clay in small amounts and don't put too much on, build it up slowly. When you're working between the rails, definitely keep to small amounts, almost pea sizes, because you'll find it goes a long way and you don't want to drag too much around. So I'm just using small lumps, using my fingers and the heel of my hand just to keep everything flattened down, and of course keep using that water to keep things nice and smooth. Little lumps of clay going into the corners and the edge of the board. I'm going to come back later on and trim this off, so for now it doesn't matter that things are a bit rough. Essentially what you're doing initially is just making sure you get your levels right, and if you've got something like a straight edge, a metal rule, or as I have in my case a metal plasterer's trowel, then you'll be able to keep those levels as accurate as possible. Softening up the next ball of clay ready to go onto the board in that last corner, and this time using my knuckles to push it down. Time to use the scraper just to get my levels correct, scraping off any lumps and just manipulating the clay across the top. At this stage I'm running quite low on clay, I've got only a small amount left. I know I'm going to have some excess once I trim the edges, but a 500 gram pack has been pretty much perfect for this area that I'm building here. Using my plastering trowel, I carefully slice off the edge to keep things lovely and square. A small amount of additional clay in the top corner just to make sure that end is level, because that's where it meets the existing cardboard hard standing. Time to pick out my oldest and cheapest boxcar. Taking the wagon, I roll it along the rails to cut a gouge in the clay, making sure that there's space for wheels to run along. Time to trim the other edges square with my scraper. One thing worth noting, and a lesson I learnt, is that the material is actually slightly easier to manipulate and work with about 24 hours after it started to dry. It's not completely hard at that point, but it's still got enough movement that you can actually cut and slice without rucking up the clay.
It's time to revisit the rails with a Swiss Army knife. It has two tools which are perfect for the job. The tin opener has a slight hook and a slight bevel, which means I can get right into that clay and hook out all the excess material. Whereas the other end, which I believe is a flat screwdriver, also has a slight bevel, and that's good for opening up the gap even further without dragging the material and tearing it. Now I decided at this point not to come back over with my flat tool. You can rework the clay quite regularly, but I decided if I just leave it sticking up quite sharp, I can come back and sand this off flat later on. If I try and manipulate it too much now, I may end up making things worse and make more mess than is worth dealing with. Time to mark the position of the engine shed. Now for the tricky bit. Using the rounded hook on the tin opener tool, I'm going to place some clay in and around the buffer stops. This really is quite fiddly, but I just take my time slowly manipulating the material and pushing it and pulling it into place. I'm not making a particularly good job of this, I realise, but I know I can come back later on and sand this down, and I may even get out my small files to give myself that little bit of detail and accuracy. What I will advise is as you go along, have a small cloth that you can use to wipe off all the excess material. But that's it. Let's let it dry and take a look.
So it has been 3 days since I got the clay onto the board. It's taken a while to dry, I must admit. I was expecting it to be dry within 24 hours, but it really wasn't. And for a couple of days after, it was still soft enough that I could press my finger into it. So I wanted this to be absolutely rock solid before I'm able to now get out a bit of sandpaper and flatten this across. So here is a close-up of how everything looks, and it is now, as you can see, really quite firm. I pressed down with the various models and the edge of the engine shed, as I said earlier, just to give myself a positioning now that I'm coming to the point of sanding. I'd now be very interested to hear some of your comments if you have gone through this process yourself. Let me know how you found it. If I'm honest, I preferred the cardboard method for concrete, which I did previously. There's something about this process that I just found a little bit stressful. It was not hard to work with, not particularly messy, but I just wasn't sure really if I was doing a good job. And now everything's dry, there's certainly some areas which really do, I feel, need a little bit more, or should have had some more when I first laid it down. And it's a little bit rough in places, whereas the hard standing concrete which I used the card for was actually way more consistent. So that's a lesson learned. I think this is brilliant if you've got a unique shape, but if you're keeping things fairly simple and square, this card method may be the way to go. You can see how I've scored this in though to match in the existing board method that I used before, and I've done that along all the edges. I've left these tops here quite rough because I'm going to be sanding these back shortly, so I'm not too fussed if things weren't quite perfect, and I think that is potentially one of the benefits. So before things get really too hot in here, because it's 32 degrees outside, I've got myself a very large flat sanding pad which should be perfect to keep things consistent, and a slightly smaller one for the tighter areas. Where I feel my skill really isn't up to scratch is around these buffer stops. It's really quite messy. I will get in there with a small amount of sandpaper and possibly even a light file just to remove some of this excess muck, but it's not brilliant. So I think a little bit of grey and some weathering around here and we really won't notice all this mucky concrete, plus a few weeds and some ballast and rocks. Yeah, I think we'll be fine. things are starting to look really good now. I apologise for my shiny face. That was really quite hot, sweaty work in this hot room at the back of the house where the sun's been hitting it all day. But I've got everything now sanded down. It's flat. There are areas that I feel that I could have done better, but that's the whole point, isn't it? This is a learning experience and I'm picking this up for the first time in my life, and so learning as I go along. So there's a small low area at the back here, but I actually don't think that's going to be a problem. It's not going to impede with anything. We've got all of these lovely models and they sit quite nicely. Where I push them down into the clay during production, you can see they actually virtually slot in. Where I've needed to, I've kind of re-gouged the expansion joint grooves, and I've had a proper little tidy around the buffer beam here. You can see that's looking much better now, a lot neater. And again, most of this is going to be covered with detritus and aging and weathering, but I think it's important just to try and give yourself the best.
I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please do give the video a thumbs up if you like the content, and absolutely give it a subscribe if you're interested in seeing more of this sort of content. I'm in it for the subscribed people, so please help me hit my next big milestone and I'll be forever thankful. Until next time, happy modelling, take care everyone, I'll see you real soon. Bye bye.